Okay, so Jeff, I'm going to share the slides that you sent to me. Hopefully you can see those now.
Can, yep.
Great.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for finding the time to join this briefing meeting and question and answer session this evening. It's being moderated by myself with Paul, and we'll do our best. I see Angus is on the call. We'll do our best to answer any questions that may come up. If there are questions that we don't feel that we can give you a valid answer to, what we will do is probably make a note of it and get a written reply back to you as soon as possible. This briefing session is in connection with an extraordinary general meeting that's being held at the Clubhouse Classroom next Sunday. Principally, this is an early opportunity for us to present to you the slides that will be presented next week, but at the same time, for those of you who are unable to come to that EGM, then this is an opportunity, as I say, to have the briefing and allow you to make a decision in terms of your proxy voting. And we would encourage you to vote. Next slide, please. This is the agenda for this evening. We'll try and keep it to an hour or just over an hour. I'll do the introductions. I don't know whether I need to do anything about the Zoom etiquette in terms of muting your microphone and limiting your camera use. We've done this on Zoom a number of times now, so I hope that it's all familiar to you by now. We will use the raise hand function in Zoom to take questions at the end rather than everyone just coming off mic and coming straight in. But that's the only other thing that I was going to mention. Presentation from Paul, our chairman, and then we'll do the question and answer session, and then I will give you a brief resume of the EGM resolution and the voting by proxy and how you can do that. And then there's a reminder again just of the meeting itself on the 12th of June. Next slide. So this EGM is being called by the Committee of Management, and it's in accordance with the 5-year strategy that we developed and approved last year, where we made a point about investigating more modern means of providing aerotow launching at Parham, recognising some of the difficulties that we are being faced with in terms of costs, environmental impact, but most specifically the maintenance of what is largely becoming a legacy and vintage aerotowing fleet. We've prepared an EGM resolution, and that's been approved unanimously by the Southdown Committee of Management. And for those unable to attend in person on the meeting on Sunday, this is the briefing that we're proposing for that meeting, and we've decided to make another run of it tonight here on Zoom and allow you to ask questions, and then hopefully that will influence you one way or the other in sending in your proxy vote for or against to that email address that's provided there. Next one. I'll very quickly go through this. The raise hand function, depending on whether you're on a tablet or on a PC or on a phone, just please use that raise hand function down the bottom and click on that, and then I will take you from the my list of members of the meeting and ask you to ask your question. You can come off mute, ask your question, and then go back on mute. Next one. That's just an indication of how it's shown depending on whether you're on a PC. This is a PC depiction to show that you have raised your hand, and I will note that. Next one. Or again, you may have to go to the right-hand bottom corner where you can pick up the raise hand function. Okay. Don't forget, please, after you've asked your question, to lower your hand so that I know that you've come off the list of people wishing to do so. Okay, and again, that's the other alternative function for those of you who've got different screens to the one that I've got. So there's your lower hand at the bottom right, and the participants list on the right hand side of the screen. Right, that's all I've got to say. Just again, as club secretary, it's good to see people participating tonight. So I hope you find the presentation of interest, and over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Jeff. Let me just make sure that I can share this with everyone. Okay, if somebody can confirm that you can see that, that would be great.
Yeah,
yep, good, thank you.
I can see that. Yeah.
If you're not already on mute, I'd appreciate it if you could mute, just so we don't get any peculiar background noises on the recording, because we will be taping this for other people to listen to that couldn't make it tonight as well. So that is appreciated. Okay, so just to echo Jeff's comments, thank you all for joining tonight. I'm not quite sure how many participants we've got, but it looks like 2 pages worth on Zoom, so I guess that's a fair number. I will bowl through the slides fairly quickly, but obviously I'm very happy to take questions as appropriate. Jeff will moderate those. Jeff, I'll probably just ask if there's any questions at the end of each slide, just to make sure we don't forget things. But if people are happy with that, we'll move on. So the new tug evaluation, that's the new tug, that's the Eurofox. This is the demonstrator that came in May, C-Max, with the 140 horsepower engine and the new prop. The agenda for this presentation is a quick look at the background, which should be familiar to most people, a description of the project team, so how we carried out an evaluation, and then each of the 3 reports, so the reports from each of the project teams: operations, maintenance and finance, a quick look at the schedule, and then some conclusions and recommendations and proposed next steps. So the objective of this presentation is to present the results of the evaluation and to confirm the recommendations that have been made to you, the membership. It does not include, just for clarity, it doesn't include detailed consideration of the fleet mix going forwards. We don't need to take that decision right now. Are we going to dispose of which tugs, syndicate tugs, that sort of things? These things do come up in the presentation, but they're not detailed and they're not considered in detail yet. The other thing that's not included is evaluation of the Grob motor glider, other than to conclude it's currently not suitable as a tug at Parham. And I think we all probably appreciate that. Certainly anyone that's seen it take off will recognise it's not suitable as a tug at Parham in its current form. So if there are no questions, I will move on. So the background, Craig provided our 2021 5-year plan last year, the next possible road ahead. And in there was a strong message saying that we really need to look at options for replacement tugs. Craig's plan reviewed the existing tug strategy, have 3, so we always had 2. It looked at tug maintenance costs, which are growing and are becoming unsustainable. And in fact, there's a slide later on or in the backup that talks to that. Craig provided his view of what the 2021 total cost would be and what the 2022 cost was likely to look like, and he was scarily accurate, and the curve is almost exponential in terms of tug maintenance costs. So that's a big issue. Tug noise, the environmental impact generally, and also can we maintain our good relationships with our neighbours given the noise that we generate today? What can we do about that? And also fuel usage. Can we find a better solution in terms of how much fuel we use and the cost of that fuel? And note that Craig's look at that predated the 2022 price increases, the massive increases that we've seen this year, and they're likely to continue. So the conclusion of that draft plan, Craig's draft plan, was to propose evaluating modern tug options with a further opportunity to perhaps operate 2 of the same type, maintain some surge capacity by perhaps housing a privately owned tow plane at a club, and I quote from his draft: "These alternatives are not without real risk, so must/will be comprehensively evaluated and studied." This presentation provides the results of that evaluation. Okay, I shall move on. So we set up 3 project teams. Each had terms of reference, which I've summarized on this slide, but the 3 teams were tug operations, tug maintenance, and tug finance. So tug operations, our current tug master and our 2 past tug masters, so Paul, John, and Angus, and Grant Kelly from the committee as a scribe and to ask layman's questions. And the goal of that group was to not think too much about maintenance or finance, but to look purely at the operational aspects. What should our tug strategy look like going forwards? And to make some recommendations based on that. Identifying and reviewing alternatives, operational alternatives, thinking about how we would test and evaluate tugs going forwards, new tugs, and also to identify any licensing. So FCL, BMAA being the British Microlight Aircraft Association, I think, BMAA requirements. So how do we actually get our tug pilots flying what may be a very different sort of aeroplane? The second group was tug maintenance. This was Jim Fleming, our technical manager, and Jim Hamilton, who you all know, I'm sure. And I was assisting with that group. And the aim there was to develop our tug maintenance strategy going forward, bearing in mind that we might be operating some sort of mixture of types, both what we could call legacy tugs like the Pawnee and the Cub, and something different. So how would we go about managing that? What would their organization be? What are the training needs? What do we need to look at in terms of tooling and spares and all that sort of thing? And the goal there was to, again, put together a training plan, to look at an introduction plan and schedules and devise what training we need to do when, what kit we need to buy when, etc. And then the third group was primarily Andrew, our treasurer, supported by me. And that was to provide a financial package that looked at the costs of buying new tugs, looked at the comparative value of buying new tugs against the cost model for continuing to operate our legacy tugs, and see whether or not it was worthwhile financially. And I asked Andrew to come up with a package that included a 5-year plan, a forecast, including a capex forecast, capital expenditure forecast, a cash flow forecast, P&L, and to make some written financial recommendations. And those appear within this slide deck. Again, we'll talk to those a little bit later. So those are the 3 project teams. They were set up immediately after the AGM this year, so at the end of March. They fit the schedule. I asked them to complete their reporting by the 1st of June. They did that. So thank you to the evaluation team for doing that. Moving on then, so the operations report started by looking at the different types of aircraft available to us and tried to identify pros and cons for each of them. I made the comment there that the Grob 109 was not considered due to its significant weight, and our Grob 109, due to its relatively low performance, it's not a suitable tug for Parham. So they looked at the Pawnee and the Super Cub, which we already have and we've got a lot of experience of. They looked at the Robin, DR400, which is popular at Lasham, I know, and was suggested by a member of our tug team as worthy of a look. And then we looked at 4 other aircraft, the Eurofox, the Safari, the Dynamic, and the Bristol, all of which are microlight types. So we try to identify pros and cons for each. This isn't an exhaustive list, but we covered what we thought were the significant items. So the Pawnee and the Super Cub and the Robin all have proven capability as tugs. They're all known as tug aircraft. They're good tug aircraft. We like them as tug aircraft. The Super Cub in particular, tuggies enjoy flying it. That's dual control, so it's suitable for training. So there's a reasonably strong case for saying the Pawnee and the Super Cub are good tugs that we would like to keep. Unfortunately, as we've discovered over the last year, they use a lot of fuel because they're old technology engines. The maintenance cost is very, very high. Parts availability is becoming an issue, in particular for the Pawnee, but we've seen it for the Cub as well. Cubs, if we were to say, well, let's buy another Cub and replace a Pawnee with a Cub, they're really expensive to buy, which is a pro as well, because it means that it has good value if we sell it. The Cub's got lower performance than the Pawnee. in its current iteration, it's really, really noisy. We're looking at what we can do about that, but it would be difficult to justify continuing to use it as it is today. And again, we have a maintenance cost issue with the Cub. So these cost issues were really the drivers behind looking at this in the first place. And if I tell you that I've not seen this month's figures yet, but if I can tell you that we have spent about enough on the pool knees and the Cub in the last 12 months to buy a new Eurofox, that will give you some idea of the scale of the problem. It's significant. We looked at the Robin. That was discarded fairly quickly, primarily due to its short field performance. It's not a short field aircraft, and we have a short field. But the maintenance cost will be similar to the Cub. We think it's similar technology, it's a vintage aircraft like the Cub and the pool knee. So we'd be buying a new or a replacement aircraft that had the similar problems to the aircraft that we've already got. Seems a bit pointless, frankly. And we would have some potential introduction issues that we'd have to address, different spares, that sort of stuff, maybe some training issues. So the Robin was discarded fairly quickly. We then looked at the 4 currently available suitable microlight types: the Eurofox, Safari, Dynamic, and Bristol. The Eurofox we've been looking at in various iterations for some time, and we looked at it previously with the 914 engine, I think. It now has a 915, which is more powerful, as do all 4 of the types on that right-hand end. The Eurofox in particular has proven capability. They're all 2-seaters, so they can all be used for training tug pilots. Eurofox has been widely adopted in the UK as a tug. In particular, I think there are 16 now in service or coming into service, and it's factory-built aircraft, which is good. Cons: lead time is long. It's a very popular acquisition at the moment. And we need to put some effort into bringing it into service. There's training, there's maintenance training requirements, there's flight crew training requirements. We have some challenges around licensing, etc., that we need to understand. Some of these cons apply to the other aircraft as well. The Dynamic, there is a 915 version of it, but they're not marketing at the moment. We don't know why they're not marketing that. The Safari is a kit. We don't think we should be taking on the risk of building a kit as our primary tug. It's untried as a tug in the UK as far as we can ascertain. It's heavier than Eurofox, so likely has reduced performance. And again, it's a new type. So the Safari, primarily because it's a kit, but it's likely to have reduced performance, we're not happy with. And it would be what I would call an orphan fleet. That might not be what other people would call it, but it would be the only Safari tug in the UK. I can't help thinking that's not a good plan. I'd much rather have a tug that somebody else is using, they've got experience on, there's a whole body of experience in the BGA operating different types of Eurofoxes. Safari can't offer that. The Dynamic and the Bristol are slightly different. The Eurofox and Safari are, you could call them Cub-like aircraft. They're tail draggers. Typically, they are you could put tundra tires on them. They're rough country aircraft, whatever. The Dynamic and the Bristol are more like a 2-seater passenger aircraft. They're quite expensive. The Dynamic is 1.5 to 2 times the cost of a Eurofox. The Bristol seems to be twice the cost of a Eurofox. So they're already starting to price themselves out. They both are considerably or significantly heavier than the Eurofox with the same engine. So they're, again, likely to have reduced takeoff performance by comparison with the Eurofox. Bristol is untried in the UK as a tug, so that brings us back to the same issue with the Safari. There's no experience. It would be an orphan fleet. And again, as is common with all of the Rotax-powered aircraft, we would have these new type introduction issues. So that's a common issue which we'll need to cover. So this was the summary of the analysis that the tug operations team did. I'll just jump across to the next slide. It's there in text form. This is pretty much what I've said already, so I'm not going to read all the way through this slide again, but it's in the slide deck, you can read it. The bottom line really is the important part. The only practical available option appears to be the Eurofox. It is available. We have one on order. We have it, or we have one, a delivery slot booked with a cancelable order at the moment. The Safari, Bristol and Dynamic, for the reasons I've discussed, the tug team did not believe are appropriate. Pawnee and Cub we're trying to get out of. Why would we buy a Robin that's just like having a Pawnee or a Cub, a vintage type? So that's the summary from the operations team so far. There are some further slides on this, which I'll go into next, if there are no questions at this point. Okay, I'm going to jump on. So this is just talking about the assessment that was done. So as I said earlier, the Eurofox 914 was assessed some time ago, some years ago. That's a 115 horsepower engine. And they used it for towing a K21 off runway 22 in a light southwesterly. And they were fairly happy with the performance, but recognized that larger gliders would be difficult, especially in a southerly wind. But they liked the handling. It seemed to perform fairly well. Didn't quite have the power that we were looking for. So when the 915 came along with its 141 horsepower engine, this provoked some interest. We had a first look at it back in November last year. It showed impressive climb performance. It was demonstrated similar or greater height achieved at the boundary than a Pawnee, and that was when towing a duo, so a big heavy glider. And the climb rate was noticeably better than the Pawnee. Some months later, so about a month or so ago, a month ago, we had a second look at the Eurofox. Roger Cornwell, the distributor, came in with his Eurofox again. This time it had a revised propeller, which was optimized for climb. So this improves the initial acceleration. Even with two pilots in the Eurofox, the performance still seemed to exceed the Pawnee in very similar conditions. We did a back-to-back test on the day. We had Pawnees and Eurofoxes flying that day. The Eurofox certainly seemed to be outperforming it. It certainly looked a hell of a lot higher as it crossed the trees at the northern end. I had the opportunity to fly behind it, being towed behind it, did some out of position exercises. All worked very nicely. It was quite gentle, but you know, you can argue that out of position exercises should be flown reasonably gently. Paul Barker, who can't be with us tonight, he's flying unfortunately, but he made the point that the Eurofox mirror actually offers a much better field of view than the legacy tugs. The glider is in view all the time through boxing the slipstream, which he saw as a real benefit. He was very, very happy. He was flying the Eurofox when I did out of position. He was very happy with it. Didn't see any issue with it at all. The aircraft itself is a lightweight aircraft. It's a microlight aircraft. There are some photos a bit later on that we can flash up as well. The airframe is the same as existing SEP Eurofox tugs, so non-microlight tugs. The structure has been very well proven in the towing role for a number of years. I mean, it's been in use for towing in this country for probably 6 or 7 years with the lower powered engines. The fact that it's microlight certification allows us to have a less onerous maintenance regime than is the case for an SEP aircraft. But I'll come back to that when I talk to the maintenance slides, because we're not necessarily going to take big advantage of that. The UK regulations for microlight airworthiness, BCAR section S, are probably the most stringent in the world. So it has been properly looked at. And Eurofox, in addition, holds CAA approvals for design, production, and flight test. So the team are comfortable that it's an airworthy aircraft. It's suitable for purpose. It's fit for purpose. And it's a well-built airplane. It doesn't seem to be flimsy. It's a nice, solid airplane. It's just lighter than the aircraft that we're used to. Okay, I'm going to move on. So no questions at this point. Evaluation flights, just so to provide the detail of what was actually done on the 2 evaluation days for the 915 engine. 28th of November, we had a 300-degree wind, 5 to 10 knots. Yes, was that a question? No, okay, I'll go on. 300-degree wind, 5 to 10 knots, departing on 04, landing on 22. They did 5 tows, with towing back to back with Uniform Charlie. And then on the 7th of May, went for 335 at 6 knots, and this was with the climb optimized propeller as opposed to the cruise optimized propeller on the first demo. Operating again on 04, 7 tows, including the 505. So I think from memory, mostly 2-seaters. Operations from 22, as I said earlier, had been tested previously using the 914 aircraft, so with the lower powered engine, and that demonstrated the 914 version could operate on 2.2, but as I said earlier, it didn't have the margin we were looking for. The 915 offers that margin, offers a significant performance increase, so it satisfies that requirement. So the operations team are happy to go ahead with it. Flying risk, so a little bit of a risk assessments. The airframe, as we've said earlier, is proven as a tug in the UK. It's had a lot of use. I don't know how many launches they've done, but it's a lot. There's a lot of aircraft in use already, and our team were happy that that was acceptable. The engine is relatively new. It's becoming mature. There's not a lot of tugging experience with the 915. There's a lot with the 914, which is also turbocharged, and that's a very well-proven engine. The 915 is becoming mature. Rotax, I'm told, are the largest manufacturer of light aircraft engines in the world now. We're comfortable that they're providing a suitable product for this. I should add, we have a 1-year warranty on the aircraft as well. Upset risks, statistically, there may be a greater risk of upset with lightweight tugs. That's perhaps inevitable. Mitigation proposed by our tug masters, past and present, is to continue emphasizing when we're training glider pilots to release if they can't follow the tug, and also to tone down the out of position exercises, and that's already happening. We've had some out of position exercises in the last couple of years which haven't gone well, and have resulted in incidents, so that there's a general movement towards toning those down a little bit, and I suspect we will look at that, and perhaps Duncan may wish to comment on that later if he's got any thoughts in that area as CFI. But some comments from the team. The Eurofox is a lot lighter than a Pawnee or a Cub. It'll take a lot less height to recover from an upset than the Pawnee does. The cable release is easier to get to than in the Pawnee, potentially reducing the time to release the glider. It's much closer to the throttle. And also the low noise and the high climb rate mean it's likely to be unnecessary to make low level turns when departing on 0.4. So that will reduce the risk of a glider getting out of position early on in the launch. And again, Paul's going to look at that and see what we can do about noise abatement terms going forwards. The Eurofox has got much better glide performance at a much lower speed than a Pawnee. So, for instance, if you have an engine failure, the risk is significantly reduced. The fuel tank is in a nicer position. The fuel tank fuel tanks are in the wings, not in the fuselage. That makes it a little safer as well. Crosswind limits, has a published crosswind limit of 12 knots. Other sites report routinely using it well above that limit. Interestingly, the Super Cub and the Pawnee don't have a published crosswind limit, but practically the view of our tuggies is that it's probably almost certainly less than 12 knots. So there's not a significant difference there. If we think about people using Eurofoxes now, a Boyne, Portmoak, Denbigh, the main wave sites, they operate in pretty rough conditions, certainly rougher than we would typically do at Parham. They're all using Eurofoxes and they're quite happy with them. So in terms of flying risk, the team considered flying risks were acceptable, or capable of mitigation. Fleet experience. So generally, the Eurofox appears to be well liked. We've spoken to, and Craig has spoken to a lot of operators when he was putting his report together. There don't appear to be bad reports about the use of the Eurofox. It's a popular machine. The users like it. So this is good, I think. Training and licensing. There are still some discussions being had about this, but in simple terms, conversion training to Eurofox for existing tug pilots is pretty straightforward. They can do a differences course, which will be signed off in the logbook. Our own instructors can do that. Microlights currently can't be used for training towards the FCL sailplane towing rating, so that may provide some challenges, may require us to have people train elsewhere for a sailplane towing rating. But the CAA are looking at this. Given that there's a lot of Eurofoxes in use, the view is it's likely the BGA would support change. If there's no change, the two options: obtain a rating through a third party with differences training at Parham, or do it through the NPPL Microlight route, which does not require an FCL rating, and then we can provide training in-house. And Paul's already written the conversion syllabus for that. So we have answers to the licensing problems for the flight crew. Fuel is another issue. The plan is that the tug fleet will standardise on UL 91. We're working on the plan to transition from the current 100 LL. In fact, I think we should do that anyway because it's cheaper. But that's a discussion we've not yet had with the technical folks. The Grob uses 100 LL. It will be the only aircraft on the site using it. So we're looking at getting a small Bowser or potentially even using drums. Kevin Dart is working on a plan for that. So the financial models that we'll look at shortly all assume a switch to UL 91. It would be too complicated if we tried to build in variability for two different fuels. Okay, moving on again. So the recommendation from the Tug Ops team is that we confirm the order with Eurofox for a 915 IS for June 23 delivery. I will try and get that accelerated. I have already asked the question, but until Roger's actually got our confirmation in his hand, he may be reluctant to commit to that. They've also recommended that we place an order to gain a delivery slot for a second aircraft, and that would be on a similar basis to the first aircraft. It would be £3,000 or so deposit. The first available delivery slots, Roger has told me, are late 24 or early 25. When I was having that conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, he told me that he'd sold 2 aircraft that day. They're very popular. Currently he gets 10 aircraft a year delivered for the UK. And then the other thing that we need to do is to look at the options for disposal of the legacy fleet. What are we actually going to do next? We don't need to make that decision this week, but we need to make it over the coming weeks. There are various options. It's a bit of a moving target because of what's going on with the tug fleet at the moment. So until that's settled down, we probably won't be making a decision. But one of the options may be that we keep all 3 legacy tugs until next year. Another may be that we dispose of one this year, which would avoid the cost of an annual. We may propose disposing of the Super Cub for a group of people to buy it as a syndicate aircraft, house it at Parham, and use it as a secondary tug, as a spare tug, in line with Craig's suggestion in the draft report last year. All of these need further discussion. They've not been discussed at this stage. Just talking about potentially getting rid of the Super Cub. The team reckon it's probably worth up to 75k, which is a lot of money, and that would be valuable to us. It's certainly more saleable than the Pawnee. We need to talk, if we're going to try and syndicate it at Parham, we need to talk about a lot of topics. It would be complex. We have no experience here. We have a history of not locating power aircraft at Parham, so we'd need to talk about that and understand what we wanted to do going forwards as well. So that's not a done deal. If we get rid of the Super Cub, there would be a loss of training capability, but Mr. Barker says that's acceptable pending the Eurofox delivery. He's comfortable with that. If we were to sail Uniform Charlie, and bear in mind this predates the current events on Uniform Charlie, that would mean we're left with only the Super Cub when the Papa Yankee annual is in progress in the early part of next year, which may also be an issue. So there's a whole bunch of things that we need to look at over the coming weeks to decide what are we going to do next once we've made this decision. If there are no questions there, I'll jump forwards again. So into the maintenance report, this is, you'll be pleased to hear, I think, just one slide. So legacy tug maintenance, so the existing fleet is carried out primarily by Jim Hamilton as part of his E&H services arrangement with us, and it's managed by our technical manager, Jim Fleming. Our goal is to maintain the current standards of maintenance. We have a very, very well maintained fleet, whilst reducing maintenance costs to an acceptable level. The BMAA regime allows maintenance by what they call a competent person or owner, and that's maintenance in terms of replacing bits but not repairing parts. You don't need a licensed aircraft engineer license for that, but we would need to work with a BMAA inspector for sign-off for an independent inspection. Our goal is to set a higher standard than that. using club approved, suitably trained, competent people. So really the emphasis being on the suitably trained people to work on the new tug. So our intent today is that we'll continue with the existing organisation for the moment. Jim will continue to support the legacy fleet until it's disposed of, or we reach some sort of disposition decision. And then we'll transition, once the fleet mix is finalised, we'll transition to a slightly changed organisation. But Jim will continue to help us by helping Jim Fleming design the maintenance regime for the new tug. So that's not quite underway yet, but will be shortly. So our planning at the moment is Jim Hamilton will go off on a Rotax course. There's actually 2 courses, line maintenance and heavy maintenance at Rotax later in this year, assuming we decide to buy the Eurofox. At the same time, probably once he's done the course, we'll do our initial spares list and tooling, equipment definitions, and start buying that stuff. Early part of next year, Jim Hamilton and possibly Jim Fleming will go off and do a BMAA inspector qualification. And then in the second quarter of 2023, when our aircraft is being finalised, we'll go off and do airframe familiarisation at Eurofox on our aircraft. So the goal is that we'll be ready to go when it's delivered, using basically our existing team. Moving on from there, in the second half of 23, the plan will be to get some more people qualified on the Rotax and Eurofox. We don't know who yet. That's a decision that we'll take over the coming weeks and months. But that will then allow us to, if we grow the Eurofox fleet to 2 aircraft and dispose of legacy aircraft, it'll enable us to transition to a new organisation which is focused around Rotax microlights. There are some opportunities with this. There's an opportunity, we're not expected to spend a lot on spares, but there's an opportunity for us to work with other clubs who are also buying Eurofoxes on spares pooling. For instance, we could share spares. I see Julian's on the call, Bogner are buying one, Ringmer are buying one as well. And there's an opportunity for us to offer third-party maintenance to other clubs as well. So this will give us the opportunity with 3 clubs within 30 or 40 miles radius of each other working together, I think going forwards to cost share, risk share on new aircraft. And I don't want to put Julian on the spot here. I have no intention of doing that. I've not discussed it with him yet, but I hope you didn't mind me suggesting that, Julian.
Not at all. It's plain common sense.
There you go. That's what we thought as well. Okay, so moving on. Financial report. Craig did a lot of financial modelling last year, and I looked at that pretty hard at the time, and was very happy with it. I asked Andrew to develop a new financial model from scratch, so that we were looking at it in a different way, a bit like the way Airbus develops software for their aircraft computers. Get 2 different teams looking at the same problem. If they come up with a similar result, then the chances are you're pretty much in the right place. So Andrew built what we call a zero-based model for tug costs. We stress tested it. I reviewed it. The input data came from club records for our legacy tug fleet costs, and also from information from Eurofox for Eurofox expected costs. The fact that we've built these models now allows us then to do something that's called sensitivity analysis. So we can look at variables that may change and how that impacts the financial future. So simple examples, the number of tows that we do per year, the cost of fuel, that sort of thing. So these scenarios, we've built 3 of them. They all assume that operations start in July 2023, and we model them out for 24 quarters. Is that right? 20, it might be 20 quarters, but going out into 2028. We built 3 scenarios. The first is do nothing. So we stick with legacy tugs, and you'll notice it says 2 legacy tugs. The reason for that was if I'd added a 3rd legacy tug to that model, it would have made that model look so poor by comparison, people would have been suspicious. But the reality is, of course, we do currently have 3 tugs, and that's our fleet. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The next scenario we looked at was buying 1 Eurofox, which is what we're proposing tonight, and sticking with a single legacy tug. Doesn't really matter which one, Pawnee or Cub. And then the 3rd scenario was that model again, but then having a 2nd Eurofox delivered in Q1 25, so in about 2.5 years' time, because that's probably the earliest we'll be able to get one. So those are the three scenarios that we looked at. The basis of analysis, it starts to get complicated here, but stick with me. Hopefully it'll be fairly clear. So the do nothing scenario, we treated that as a baseline because that's where we are today. In reality, we need to maintain 3 tugs currently, so this is quite conservative. But even so, legacy tug cost forecasts are quite high. To try and keep the comparison simple, because there are lots of moving parts and lots of changing costs, the numbers are actually all over the place. So what I tried to do was treat the 2 legacy tugs as a baseline, and then come up with a ratio that compared how the other 2 scenarios compared against them in percentage terms. So if we take 100% as the baseline, if the 2 Eurofox scenario comes out at 90% efficiency ratio, then it's of less benefit than 2 legacy tugs. If it comes out at 110%, then it's of more benefit to the club than 2 tugs. Without looking at the absolute numbers involved, we're just comparing the options. Hopefully you understand where I've gone with that. Confirmation of a second Eurofox purchase, I mean, we've modelled it, but that would only come after we've had 6 months. It would only need to come after we've had 6 months operating experience with the number 1 aircraft. If we find it's all going horribly wrong, we won't be committed to the second one. Just thought that was an important point to make. The other important point to make about the second one is it's likely to cost more. I don't know how much yet, but it could be as much as 10%. However, over 5 or 6 years that we've modeled, that actually has it's 10 grand over 5 or 6 years. It makes very, very little difference to the validity or the performance of the model. So the key sensitivities, fuel cost is a key sensitivity, as I suspect you appreciate. The Eurofox uses less fuel than the Pawnee or the Cub. UL99 is cheaper than 100LL at the moment. That's apparently not always been the case, but the prices that we were quoted on the 1st of June this year, including tax, for UL91 was 179 a litre, for 100LL was 198 a litre. We've assumed the use of UL91 throughout the model, just to try and keep it reasonably simple and apples for apples. Unplanned maintenance costs impact all of the scenarios. They're expected to be significantly lower for Rotax engines than for Lycoming engines. Rotax is supported in the UK. We have a year of warranty on each engine. We don't have any parts obsolescence issues. The parts are easily available because the engines are in production, high rate of production. Just a point, if Uniform Charlie is retained, so if we stick with the do nothing option, then the engine will need a rebuild fairly soon, which will probably be at least £40,000, possibly more. The aircraft will be out of use for at least 12 weeks, possibly more. And we will also at some point need to recover the wings in the next 2 or 3 years, which will be another, let's say 10 grand for a round number. So that's just some background information that's useful. Another key sensitivity is the sales value achieved for legacy tugs. I've already said the tug ops team suggested we might get as much as 75k for a Cub. We've assumed 25k for each legacy tug that we sell, so there's upside there. And then the number of launches impacts all scenarios. So I did a little bit of research on this. The 10-year average for launches is 3,052 per year, going back over 10 years. So 3,000 launches a year appears to be a reasonable number to use in our scenario. The 5-year plan recommended we try to do a lot more flying than that. The more flying we do, the better off we are. We all understand that, but 3,000 a year is sort of where we are at the moment. So let's stick with that and see if that works for us. Interestingly, after the 5 years of the scenarios, after they've run their course, if we do 1,600 launches a year, we will break even if we stick with the legacy tugs. We'll break even with 2 Eurofoxes with 1,500 launches per year. So there's not a huge amount of difference there, but bear in mind that we've paid for 2 new airplanes. If we've invested over £200,000 in new airplanes, if we've got the Eurofoxes. So Conclusions. This is what we call the optimistic case, and the optimistic case assumes we don't have to spend as much money as we've been spending historically on maintenance. It's as simple as that. It assumes we can get away with £10,000 a year maintenance for the legacy fleet. And bear in mind, this is only 2 aircraft in this model. It assumes no major repair bills going forwards in that 5-year period to the end of 2028. It assumes no major repair bills for legacy tugs, which we know is extraordinarily unlikely because we already know that Uniform Charlie is going to need an engine rebuild. So this is why we call it the optimistic case. So in the optimistic case, if we there's a lot of information here, but if you look at if you can see the graph here, if you go out to Q2 2028, there are 3 columns. There's an orange one, a grey one, and a mustard one. The orange column is where we are with the legacy tugs. So the cumulative net cash would be about 300,000. The grey one is 1 Eurofox and 1 legacy. Cumulative net cash again is about 300,000. There's £5,000 difference over that period. That's lost in the noise. It really is. The mustard line is 1 Eurofox and 1 legacy becoming 2 Eurofoxes. So this is where I think we will end up, or where I'd like to see us end up. That's slightly worse performing, that we're £33,000 worse off over the 5-year period. But again, it's a few £1,000s a year. And there's that efficiency ratio I was talking to you about. So the grey one, 1 Eurofox and 1 legacy, 102%. It gives you slightly more benefit to sticking with 2 legacies. The mustard coloured one, going to 2 Eurofoxes, give you slightly less benefit. And that's because, again, we're amortizing the cost of buying 2 new airplanes in that 5-year period. If we were to extend this model out another 4 or 5 years, the mustard column would outperform the other 2 because of the savings made in the out years because of fuel usage and maintenance costs. So that's the optimistic case. We also looked at a more realistic case, because this case ignores the increasing obsolescence, maintenance, reliability burden that we have with the legacy tugs. So it's actually optimistic but high risk. Moving on to our conclusions, we took a more realistic scenario and we adjusted the numbers to something more representative of what's been happening recently. So we've adjusted the maintenance costs for the legacy fleet, again, only 2 aircraft, not 3, to £15,000 a year. That's significantly less still than we've been paying for the last several years. But there's an argument to say it's possible that most of the big spending has happened and that we may return to a 15K a year cost for the annual that has been our target for many years. We've not achieved it for a long time. There's another slide in backup. I can remind you of the exponential curve of our tug maintenance costs. This realistic scenario assumes 50K on Uniform Charlie. That's an engine rebuild and recovering the wings if we retain 2 legacy aircraft. That's probably understated quite significantly. It's probably going to be more than that, but it's a wet finger in the air number at the moment. And it also assumes a 10K major repair bill for the Eurofox sometime in the 5 years of usage. I didn't think it was reasonable to assume we were going to have to spend a lot of money on the legacy tugs and not make a similar assumption for the Eurofox. The Eurofox might break. We might wear a gearbox out or something. So let's assume we're going to spend 10K at some point in that 5-year period on our first or second Eurofox. Not changed from 3,000 tows a year. I've assumed fuel prices will remain the same, but as a reminder, if fuel prices go up, the efficiency ratio of the Eurofox improves. So that's a little bit of a hedge against fuel price increases if we're buying Eurofoxes. This scenario really does strongly support the introduction of the Eurofox. If we're a bit more realistic with our numbers, we can see, again, looking at here, that the efficiency ratio for 1 Eurofox and 1 legacy goes to 131%. We're getting 65, 66,000 pounds more than the legacies in this case. The absolute number, of course, has gone down. It was 300,000. The legacies are now making about 260. sorry, less than that, about 200, because we've added 50k of cost into the model. The grey column, therefore, is unimpacted by that 50k, but it's impacted by the 10k. So it's now showing at £65,000 better. That's about 265, 270, something like that, because we've added costs for the Eurofox there as well. And the 2 Eurofox is actually much closer now to this single Eurofox and 1 legacy tug cost, and they're starting to home in on that 130%. And as I say as I said on the previous slide, the longer we build this model out, the closer or the better the performance will be of the mustard column. So we're confident as we can be. Bear in mind that the two major sensitivities, fuel prices and maintenance costs, are pretty much entirely outside our control for the legacy fleet in particular, but we're as confident as we can be at this point that this is a more realistic model of what's going to happen over the next 5 years. And again, this strongly supports certainly the acquisition of a single Eurofox, and I would argue the acquisition of a second Eurofox. Bear in mind, we could add, if we sell the Pawnee for £75,000, we could add another 50 grand to those two numbers quite easily. So that's the conclusion of the financial report. I also asked Andrew to take a look at the impact on what I described to him as our savings account, our cash balance. As of the 1st of June last year, we had about £350,000 cash sitting in various locations. That had improved to 390 by the end of last year, because we actually had quite a good year. His forecast for this year is 425, and that assumes that in 2022 we will only break even, will not make a profit. We're likely to make a profit. We have made profits historically over the last several years, but even if we don't make a profit, our cash balance will be around 425. And his forecast based on that is that by the 1st of June 2023, which is when we need to make the final payment approximately on Eurofox number 1, we'll have a balance of cash, of available cash, of about 440,000. If we look at the money that's going to come out before then, 65,000 is the bill that we've not yet paid for Papa Yankee's maintenance this year. So that's got to come out. That takes us down to 375. £3,000 for another Eurofox deposit, £55,000, 2 payments, each of £55,000 to pay for the Eurofox. That takes us down to just over £250,000 on the 1st of May 23. So we have enough, even at that point, assuming we have only a break-even year in 2022, we have enough to buy another Eurofox outright at that point quite easily. Perhaps equally important, we have enough funding available to us to look at the other things that we want to do. And hopefully you're aware that there is another group working, which is a site and facilities group. Andy Wood, Kevin Dart, and a bunch of willing pressed men are working on that group, looking at what are the things that we want to do on the site, looking at things like improving drainage. Do we want to get showers? What do we want to do about car parking? Where do we want to put trailers? Do we want to have caravans? They're looking at this whole range of things. The runway proposal, or the all-weather safety surface, as we called it, cutting down trees, all sorts of things. There is a fairly significant sum of money, even after buying Eurofox, available to the club to do those things. So they're not risked by buying the Eurofox. And I think that's quite an important point to make. So moving on, if there are no questions at this point, recommendations from the financial report. The baseline case, the optimistic case, suggests that doing nothing's a viable option. And yeah, it is, if we're prepared to take the risk. And the risk is that we're going to see increasing obsolescence, increasing maintenance burden, and increasing reliability burden of these vintage aircraft. They are vintage aircraft with vintage engines that are difficult to maintain. It's difficult to get parts for them. Some of you may be aware of the issue we had getting replacement struts for the Pawnee earlier this year. I think it was came out about $10,000 to get a pair of struts for the pull knee. And they were really, really difficult to find. We may not be able to do that again. If we have struts on the Uniform Charlie needing replacement at some point because they corroded, we may not be able to get the struts. It's as simple as that. We're struggling now to get Lycoming engine parts. So they're really, really difficult to maintain. They take a lot of effort to maintain them. I mean, they're superbly maintained, don't get me wrong, but it costs a bloody fortune. It costs a fortune. So it's high risk. Sticking with the legacy tugs is high risk. As I pointed out earlier, it's prudent to allow at least 40k, probably 50k for major repairs of Uniform Charlie during the scenario period. That changes the financial picture quite substantially. That combined with the downtime risk, and as I said earlier, Uniform Charlie's proposed engine repair is going to be at least 12 weeks out of service. If we started now, we probably wouldn't see it again before the end of the season. Just makes these hanging on to these old aeroplanes less and less attractive, and the problems are only going to get worse. So if we factor in typical historic costs and we go to the more realistic scenario, we start to see the benefits of going to a new tug. The financial model includes a lot of assumptions and there's a lot of finger in the air stuff, but we think they're valid. We think the trends that are being shown by the financial modeling is valid. Eurofox offers a low noise, low impact tugging solution to us. For those of you that have heard it during a launch, it's actually quite difficult to hear. It's quite astonishing. It's very, very quiet. We have huge support from our local community. I don't know how long that'll last if we keep flying the Cub in its current condition, but we should be offering something to our local community and saying, look, we're doing the best we can to keep this quiet. Gives us more operational flexibility. If we have a quieter aircraft, it means that we can manage different tugging routes, etc., etc. Supportability is improved, maintainability is improved, longevity is improved. We'll be able to keep these aircraft for some considerable time, and it avoids the risk of further major expense on the legacy tugs. So there's a double win. The business case is improved by selling the legacy tugs. As I said, the fleet mix is yet to be determined, but we've taken a conservative view on value. There's some potential upside there. It may be that we can't sell the pull knees at all, of course, but I think there's a market out there for the Cub for sure. But in any case, in each case that we've looked at, after a few years, 5-6 years, in fact less than that, the new tugs have paid for themselves and we'll start to rebuild our cash reserves. So just thinking back to the previous slide showing the £262,000 left after we pay for the first Eurofox, we will be increasing that number based on what we've seen in the models, assuming the costs are reasonably accurate, and we continue to do the amount of flying that we've been doing over the last 10 years. So the recommendation is that we go with it from a financial perspective. Just jumping across the schedules, what we call a cartoon schedule. We're about here. We've just given notice for the EGM in 2 weeks. The EGM event was targeted to be on the 19th of June. It's actually going to be on the 12th. The goal is to confirm the order to Eurofox as soon as we get a positive vote. We may not, in which case we won't confirm it. The Eurofox order decision, the committee have agreed that we will go ahead and do that, assuming the membership direct us to buy Eurofox number 1. So if we get approval to buy Eurofox number 1 from the EGM, we will order Eurofox number 2 at the same time. That may be a useful lever on Roger on trying to get an earlier delivery date. We'll see. So we'll place that order for delivery in probably about January 25, maybe December 24. In the meantime, lots of stuff to do. The maintenance courses that I've mentioned, the spares order that I mentioned, fuel planning, working out how we're going to do that. The goal being to have UL 91 available by the end of April 23 as a target date. Other things we need to do for Eurofox number 1, we need to agree the final specification. There are still some things to talk about, ranging from whether or not we want a retrieve winch to what color do we want it. So there's a bunch of stuff to do yet that the tug operations team will get involved in. I don't know if we'll have a vote on the colour. I suspect not. The production start, when they start welding the frame, is, we've been told, is December. We might be able to pull that forward. Let's see. We need to make a payment at that point, a 40% payment in December. They will then be building the aircraft. It's going to be complete in the end of June 23, they're currently saying. We will then take delivery, accept it, and make a 60% payment. So that will be end of Q2 next year. So that's the outline schedule. It needs a little bit of a tweak because some of the dates at the top left-hand corner here have moved slightly, but they've moved in the right direction, which is good. Okay, I think we're on to the final slide. So the recommendations and approvals in line with the resolution. The resolution that Jeff proposed at the start of the meeting was that in accordance with the 5-year strategy, having investigated more modern means of towing, the Committee of Management recommends to the membership that the Southdown Gliding Club procures Eurofox 915 IS aircraft as its future means of providing aerotow launch facilities at Parham. The committee agreed this last night, so we have unanimous committee support for this. So what we need to do is to approve the purchase of Eurofox number 1, and following on from that, we will make a £3,000 commitment to place an order for Eurofox number 2 at the same time. That's the end of the presentation. I would just, for those that haven't seen it in detail, just flash you through some photographs of the Eurofox with its folding wing, with its 4-bladed climb optimized propeller. It's a very cute looking aircraft, you have to admit that. It's well equipped. The equipment specification is to be determined. That may adjust the price a little bit, but it won't be substantial. There's the cockpit. It's a really nice looking little aeroplane. Oh, and this is the slide that I was talking about earlier on. This is from Craig's presentation last year. Craig postulated that by the end of 2021, we will have spent 54. And he suggested that this year, if the rate of increase continued, we'd be up around the 65 to 70k mark. We're already through that, and it's June. That's the case for maintenance costs being too high. We cannot continue like this. This is unsustainable, I think. I mean, if we chose to continue flying a legacy tugs, yeah, there's a good chance that will come down, but it's not going to come down substantially. That nice cash pile that I talked about a bit earlier on will just get burnt up in replacement cylinders and replacement struts and replacement magnetos, etc., etc., etc. That's not, in my view, the best use for it. That's the end of my presentation. I'm just going to go back to the slide that says questions. Jeff, are you happy for us to start taking questions, or did you want to jump back into the other slide deck?
No, I think while you've got your presentation up, we can start taking questions. I just wonder whether we should stop recording at this point.
I'm happy to continue recording.
All right.
Okay.
Let's continue. Okay. So that's the presentation that we have, which will be again a run through at the EGM meeting itself next Sunday. So it's a good dress rehearsal. James, I could see your hand up. If you'd like to come off mute and ask your question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Great presentation, good set of slides as well. So thanks for the committee and everyone who's put that in. I know there's some, I'm not a tug pilot, but I just hear what a few of them talk around the sides. I'm just wondering if and this might be the same risk if we change whatever tug we move to, but I know there's quite among some tug pilots around the Eurofox. So the question is there a risk in moving to it that and if we assess the risk that we lose the tug pilot population, and that having the Eurofox actually in a short term reduces our tugging capacity, because you have a lot of tug pilots who move away from it. And then the second question was, which is just about the fuel change from the UL 100 to the UL 91 as a turbo owning aircraft. pilot. I'm not quite sure what our specification of fuel is, but we've only ever used the fuel of UL 100 at the site. I think it can actually use just normal petrol. But would that an implication for members? I know it's not necessarily the club's requirement to provide fuel for members, but it's an inconvenience. We have to go and source it from somewhere else. Whether that's been considered about private owners and their need for fuel for turbos or jets.
Let me answer the second one first. The intent is that we will, current intent is that we'll continue operating the GROB. Excuse me. The GROB requires 100 LL, so we will have a 100 LL solution of some sort in place. We haven't finalised what that is. Kevin's looking at small mobile bowsers, but it could just be drums with a hand pump. That may be all that we need, but the cost of that is included in the cost model. We've allowed about £5,000 for that, I think, so it's unlikely to be that much. We've seen second-hand Bowsers for about £2,000, something like that. So the intent is that we will continue to provide 100 LL for as long as we need it. It may ultimately just be a drum of 100 LL. That might put the cost up a little bit. I don't know, but the quantities that you use are pretty low, I'm guessing. So I don't think that will be a huge issue. But we intend continuing to make 100 LL available.
I think what we would do though is we would also advise all club members who are using fuel from the fuel store today to check with their aircraft flight manual just to see what fuels their engines can take.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we'll do.
The first one.
Okay. Sorry, Jeff. No, you go ahead.
Okay, the tug pilot loss. I think Paul Barker is well aware of this issue, and we do have. Well, he does have a list of people that he'd like to bring through as future tug pilots as well. I think the problem he's got at the moment is his availability, because his company are working him quite hard at the moment. The idea that the conversion is a fairly straightforward process that can be signed off in the pilot's logbook from those of us who've got FCL licenses, and it could be 1 to 2 hours of conversion time, is encouraging. I don't think we underestimate the fact that, you know, this is a different aircraft to our beloved Pawnee and Super Cub that we've been flying for many years. So it is going to be different. And while I have the floor, I would just make the point that from a ground handling point of view, for all club members, this is a different aeroplane to the one that we've currently got as a tow plane. You can't just push on the struts as you do on the Pawnee or the Super Cub. You have to be very careful how you handle it, because there are only certain points which you can push on. Having said that, it's extremely light, so maneuvering it is a lot easier. But in terms of the tug pilots, the other issue that we have, as any club does, is succession planning. You know, as the demographic of our tug pilot community has to be taken into account. So we are factoring in, as I say, hopefully younger tug pilots, and the training issue is something that we are conscious of and bringing on new pilots. But we would hope to convert and retain the majority, if not all, of the current tug pilots.
I think the other point to add to that, Jeff and James, is that we will have a legacy tug in service for some considerable time. So that gives us the opportunity to do comparisons, to confirm whether a Eurofox is actually the right tug for us. You know, we believe it is. The tug operations team, who are all very, very experienced tug pilots, are comfortable that it is. And yeah, people have concerns about change, they always do. And I think some of the questions that have been asked are very good questions. I've not heard all of them because I'm not a tug pilot either. But Paul has answered them certainly to the satisfaction of the operations team, and I think that will continue. But if people have got specific questions to ask Paul will be at the EGM. He couldn't join us tonight. The reason the EGM's on the 12th was because that was when Paul was available. We wanted to make sure he was there to answer these sorts of questions, but unfortunately he couldn't be available tonight. But I think the key point is we will have a legacy tug available for some time after the introduction of the Eurofox. So if there are people that prefer not to fly the Eurofox, then arguably they could continue to fly the Pawnee or the Cub. The financial modelling is based on a ratio of usage, and it assumes that we use the Eurofox much more than we use the Pawnee because it's more cost efficient to do so. You know, we'd need to look at whether we had to adjust the model in some circumstances of if there are a large number of tug pilots said they only wanted to fly the Pawnee, as an example. But I don't think that's going to happen personally. I mean, I've mostly seen positive feedback from people.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, Kevin Beale.
Hello, hi. I heard a lot of discussions about using a wind-in tow rope on the Eurofox, which on the face of it sounds like a great idea, but done a fair bit of research into this. Unfortunately, not being able to get hold of a maintenance manual. And my concern is if you have a damaged rope for any reason in the middle of the day, how do you change that rope? Does someone need to be trained to start undoing panels on the winch? Bearing in mind it's got a spring-loaded guillotine in it, which could quite easily take someone's hand off. Yeah, and the time involved in doing that, whereas at the moment, if you have a normal toss release at the back, you simply go and get another rope. I just wanted to make sure that's being considered in any actions that are taken. Really.
The answer is it's been discussed. It's not yet been discussed in detail. I've asked exactly the same questions. Yeah. The tug operations team have expressed a preference for safety reasons to have a retrievable rope or a winchable rope, which I think are valid reasons. You know, it's dragging a rope through the trees or over the power lines has historically been a bit of a problem for us, and anything we can do to mitigate that is a good thing. But equally, as you're quite right to raise the issue of maintenance of the winch, and we need to make sure we understand that before we commit to it. This is part of the specification discussion that's coming up, Kevin. So it'll be addressed there. There is potentially, there's been discussion about going to Eurofox and saying, can you just put a standard toss hook on there as well? So to be used in that case. I've heard conflicting stories, for want of a better word. One being that you can't do that because the retrieve winch is fitted to the same hard point, and consequently you can't fit a standard toss hook to it. The other being that it must be possible if we ask enough for it, they'll do it. So I don't know what the right answer is for that, but that again, that's a discussion to be having with Eurofox. The one thing I can be absolutely sure of is if we ask for a toss hook as well, the price will go up. But you know, that might be worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. But the last thing you want is in the middle of a busy day finding a rope issue and it's going to take you 2 hours to fix.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely agreed. That's a good question. Thank you very much for raising it. And, yeah.
Okay.
And in answer to the first part of that question, I think yes, we wouldn't just let anybody to untangle a winch. It would have to be someone who is trained on the winch and how you access it and how you retrieve the winch, the rope from that. So yeah, it would have to be. It's another part of the training. I mean, there's training that goes through all of this in introducing a new type of aircraft onto the site. And in all aspects, and yes, you will probably be approached, Kevin, in terms of maintaining such.
I wasn't edging to that, but I was just making sure.
But with your important responsibilities,
of course,
you would be involved.
Yeah, okay.
You can become the winch untangling manager.
Yeah. I'm not a. Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Kevin. Good question.
Yeah.
I mean, just for information, even on a 1,000-foot error tow, if the tug pilot were to select the cable retrieve, by the time the tug is over the trees at the end of the field, the rope should be fully retrieved inside the aircraft. And we've asked questions of other clubs how long it takes. So, you know, we have good data there to suggest that the winch is viable, operating in Parham, but it does add another element of complexity, and it's not cheap. It's another £7,000, I think, on the book price. So yes, we have considered it, but safety is paramount, and I think the tug master feels quite strongly about this one.
Yeah.
Any other questions, please? Seb, I see your hand raised, please. Seb,
You there, Seb?
You're off mute, so I don't know why we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
we
now.
can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. With the winchable rope, are you still able to is the tug pilot still able to release if needed?
Yes. He has
Okay.
he has a guillotine.
All right.
So it's a slightly more dramatic event, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, but he can. Yeah.
Cool.
Good.
Tom, question, please.
Yeah, hello. Fairly basic, but is the 915 Rotax also able to use MoGas? Is it rated for that?
No, it's not recommended.
Okay. Just trying to save you some more money.
Thank you. It can run on 100 LL, but that has impact on the when 100 LL was cheaper than UL 91. That was something we were looking at, but it has impact on the oil change frequency for some reason that I don't understand. But the no, it doesn't run on MoGas.
Fine, fair enough.
Okay. Any more?
Any other questions?
I can see Les's hand waving, but I don't think we should talk to him because he hasn't put his hand up successfully in Zoom.
I don't know how.
I blame that on Jeff. What's your question, Les?
I was just going to offer some information, having flown the Eurofox for quite a long time now at current club, and having flown the Super Cubs and the Pawnees previously to move in at Southdown. Regarding the retrieve winch, I would definitely recommend that. It's made a big impact on our operations, particularly as we come across some public footpaths. It's much safer from hitting members of the public. It's easy to operate. It's not a problem. Changing the rope when there has been a problem is normally only taken about half an hour at the most. We have a number of lengths of rope ready available should it happen, but it's only happened twice in about 8 years. So it's unlikely to be an issue. If you put too much rope on the drum, then it can fall off and then it can give you a tangle, but it's not really an issue. In terms of converting from Pawnees and Super Cubs to the Eurofox, most people converted fairly quickly to it without any issues. It just takes a little bit of time, probably 2 or 3 hours, and a number of launches and landings will be sufficient. We have experienced a lot of problems with gearboxes wearing out. And I think, I can't be sure now, but I think we might be on number 8. And we're on the 2nd engine. We're roughly getting about 1,200 hours out of them. Just a bit of information. If you want to come and try our Eurofox should be welcome. We've also had a few issues with the brakes. So currently, although we've got 2 sets of dual controls, we don't have brakes on the right-hand seat. That's just a bit of information. You want any more? Come and see us.
Thanks, Les. And for the benefit of everyone on the call, can you just say which club you're from now?
Currently at Buckminster.
Buckminster, thank you.
Les, just a quick question. What size engine have you got in your current Eurofox?
The simple answer is not big enough. It's the smaller engine, but electronic fuel injected.
So that's the 912?
912, yeah.
912, okay.
Yeah, and even though we're operating off a concrete runway, it's quite tight going out with big 2-seaters, and you can't operate big gliders with water ballast on. It's just too dangerous.
That's the 100 horsepower engine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As opposed to
I was
140.
interested in this because we're looking at maybe changing to the one that you're looking at.
And this is one perhaps as a homework question, but can you find out how long your ropes are on the drum?
We've got 180 feet is the longest. That's really as long as you can get on sensibly.
Yeah, but I sense that the winch reliability may be a fact. Sorry, the length of the rope may be a factor in the winch reliability. So I just wondered what you were operating. That was all.
The winch has never been a problem. It's sometimes the rope comes off of the drum if you put too much on.
Yeah.
It's also key when you're retracting the rope that you don't go too fast or too slow.
Yeah.
So you need to be about 70 knots when you're retracting the rope. Otherwise, you could end up with a tangle.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for contributing. Are there any other questions from anybody else on the call tonight? Okay, we'll close that there then. Paul, if you just go back to the to my slide deck, please.
Yep. Bear with me. Can you see it, Jeff?
Yep. Yeah, I can.
Cool. Good.
So as we mentioned before, this is the briefing that we're going to do next Sunday in the classroom at Parham. If you can't attend that meeting and in person, we are presenting you with the opportunity to vote on the resolution via proxy. That's the same process we used at the recent AGM. If you do plan on attending the EGM, please do not vote by proxy. Your vote will not be counted because your vote at the EGM by show of hands will be recorded at the meeting itself. So one or the other, please. And you're voting by proxy to the email address egmproxy@southdowngliding.co.uk by close of play on Friday of this week, please, the 10th. The other option is you come to the meeting next Sunday, and I hope at least 20 of you do. And that's at 6 p.m. in the clubhouse classroom. And that's it, I think, Paul.
I think so, unless anyone's got any last minute questions, comments, feedback, feel free to make it. I had picked up a couple of comments in background from people, so thank you for those. That was helpful.
Yeah, I've got one or two chats.
Yeah,
So,
but I suggest we close the meeting. Hour and a half. That wasn't too bad, was it? Not too painful. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. It's much appreciated. And if we don't see you at the EGM next Sunday, as Jeff has said, please vote. It's important that you vote.
Charles,
And,
I've got your, oh, you got a thumb up. That's right, not a hand up. Thank you anyway, everyone.
Paul Isaacs, I don't seem to be able to find this hand up business, but
okay, Steve, go away.
can
Shoot.
All I was going to say was, certainly from my personal point of view, I think the format of this Zoom EGM for this sort of meeting is absolutely brilliant. From the point of view that spending an hour and a half in my study on a Monday evening beats the hell out of a 4-hour round trip to the gliding club on a Sunday evening. Thank you.
Can I just make a plea though? We do need to have a quorum at the meeting on Sunday. So please, if you can come and you would like to vote at the meeting on Sunday, you can spare a couple of hours, please do come. Otherwise, we'll have to redo this as an entirely virtual EGM and do it just by that way. But we wanted to go back to being in person at the clubhouse if at all possible, because we do feel that it does provide for greater interaction. I do sympathise though with those of you who have a distance to come, but if you can spare the time on Sunday, please do come to the EGM.
Absolutely.
I assume
Good.
the bars will be open afterwards.
And before.
Yes, and during, if you want. Good stuff. Right, see you in the bar on Sunday in that case.
Paul.
Was that
Just a
another
quick one,
question?
Paul. I'm 17 still. Am I allowed to vote?
You're a junior member, so I think I'm right in saying, Jeff, that juniors do not get to vote on this. Is that correct?
I would love to give you the vote, Seb, but no, I'm afraid we can't accept a vote this time. Ask Merlin to vote for you.
Okay.
Or your dad.
He can vote. He can vote. She's 18 now.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming
Thank
anyway.
you very much for
Appreciate it.
attending, everyone.
Thanks, guys.